Chapter 6: The Final Dispersion of the Black Jews of Africa. Early North Africa. Many scholars call the inhabitants of North Africa Berbers, but I shall not do so. I do not like this word Berber. First of all, it is not a native word of Africa. Therefore, it is misleading. The Greeks and Romans called the people of North Africa Berbers, which means barbarians. However, the people of this region have their own names. The unbiased Greek historian Herodotus, may honor be given unto him, gives the original names of the tribes of North Africa, beginning from Egypt, extending to the Atlantic Ocean. They are as follows: Adramacide, Adramacade, Gilgamay, Abisite, Anashe, Cabalians or Cabalians, Nasamonians, Nundemians or Numidians or Numidians, excuse my pronunciations, please. Saili, Garamentanians, Mackay, Jindanes, Lolofagi, Maclayans, Ossians, Troglodytes, Zavians, Zygantians, Aturanians, and the Atlantes. Herodotus says there are 4 nations in Africa. 2 are indigenous, Ethiopians and Libyans. The Phoenicians and Greeks are newcomers. Herodotus considered all the North African tribes to be Libyans, and all the Africans below the Sahara he called Ethiopians. These are his 2 indigenous nations in Africa. The original inhabitants of North Africa were Hamites. These Hamites were black like the Egyptians, and this point has been proven by Herodotus. Because most of the history in the Western world has been distorted, it becomes necessary for me to explain to you some of these distortions, says Heinrich Barth, a European writer. The inhabitants of Walla Walla are a mixed race of blacks and whites. Now the question is, whom does he include as his whites? Continues Barth. The whites are Berbers and Arabs. These Berbers and Arabs were not whites in ancient times. What is his basis for calling them whites? The obvious reason is that he wants to attribute ancient advanced civilization to the white race in order to perpetuate the philosophy of white supremacy. Many black people have straight noses and thin lips. The black people that possess these qualities are said to have a white morphology form. Joseph Williams has this to say about the blacks of West Africa. In most mixed groups of Negroes, a Sanghois may be identified at first glance. His skin is black as theirs. Certainly, but nothing in his mask conforms to their well-known characteristics. The nose of the Songhai is straight and long, pointed rather than flat. The lips are comparatively thin, and the mouth wide rather than prominent and broad, while the eyes are deeply set and straight in their orbits. A cursory glance shows that the profile resembles that of the Europeans or European. Some European writers even penetrate into the blackest Africa and divide the blacks according to the shape of their noses and lips. Continues Williams, the Songhais, through black-skinned and woolly-haired, their features are often of Caucasian cast. There are many colored people in the United States with straight noses and thin lips, even as black as tar, and the Europeans do not classify these colored people as belonging to the white race. After extensive research, my conclusion is this. Some European writers have classified certain tribes in Africa and Asia as belonging to the white race. They do this as long as it is psychologically advantageous, in order to inflate their ego and to give them a prominent place in Afro-Asian history. Not only were the people of Africa and Asia black in ancient times, but also the European lands of the Mediterranean. The Canaanites and Phoenicians in Africa. The language, which is called Hebrew Phoenician or Canaanite, was employed in the lands called Phoenicia, Palestine, or Canaan for over 1,000 years before the Armenians, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, came to Canaan. The Israelites lost their Aramaic language and adopted the Hebrew speech of the Canaanites. The Hebrew Phoenician merchants from the cities of Sidon and Tyre controlled the trade along the Mediterranean coast for more than 1,000 years before there were any economic treaties made with the Israelites. The Hebrew-speaking Phoenicians, Canaanites, established their greatest city, Carthage, at Tunis, in North Africa. All the Canaanites were black people. Before the Phoenicians established their colony, Carthage, in Africa, many Hebrew-speaking Canaanites had migrated across northern Africa. One Tosfida, quoting an older source, says that when Joshua approached Canaan, he told the inhabitants that 3 courses were open to them. They could either leave the country, or they could sue for peace, or they could declare war against him. The Girgashites, among others, preferred to withdraw into Africa. The Tosfida goes on to say that the Amorites, the Cadmoni, the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, some of whom figure among the founders of Carthage, also went to Africa. These traditions date from a period when communication between Africa and Phoenicia was continuous. The proper names of Girgash and Kanaz are often met with in Carthaginian and Phoenician inscriptions. The Talmud says that the Canaanites in Africa asked Alexander the Great to restore to them their country, which had been taken from their ancestors by Joshua ben Nun. These traditions have been ratified by the fathers of the church. Thus, St. Jerome calls to witness the Talmud to support his statement that the Girgashites established colonies in Africa, and St. Augustine designates the natives of Africa as Canaanites. The prophet Isaiah 19:18, that's Isaiah 19:18, says that 5 cities in Africa will speak the language of Canaan. We should not forget that the Israelites have been engaged in commercial enterprises, activities, and migrations since Solomon's treaty with the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians established their metropolis, Carthage, in the 9th century BC. Eventually, they conquered the neighboring tribes from Libya to the Atlantic Ocean, disseminating their Hebrew Phoenician language and culture in every direction. The Hebrew Phoenician language and culture were invigorated and strengthened by the deportation and migration of energetic black Hebrews from Palestine. Ptolemy Soter of Egypt conquered Syria and Phoenicia, deporting more than 100,000 Hebrews. The Persian king Cambyses had previously sanctioned the colonization of Hebrews in Egypt. During the wars of the Maccabees, thousands of Hebrews became slaves and exiles. Ptolemy Lathyrus captured 10,000 slaves from the region of the Sea of Galilee. The kings of Egypt, Sasmatic I and Sasmatic II, used Israelite garrisons on the Egyptian borders near Libya. The wars with Rome compelled hundreds of thousands more to escape into North Africa. During the Punic Wars and after, North Africa contained a large Hebrew population. This Hebrew population made converts and intermarried with the Canaanites and the native Africans. The city and language of Hannibal. At the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists have found about 4,000 inscriptions in the ancient language of Canaan. Nahum Slouch says these inscriptions date from the time of Nehemiah, of Simon the Just, of Hannibal, and Hazmabel, says Slouch. And most valuable of all, we have found again the ancient language and writing of Canaan, the rich idiomatic speech of a city which once counted 700,000 inhabitants. And we Hebrew writers, we who write and feel in our biblical tongue, have recognized at once that this recalled Phoenician language is nothing more nor less than Hebrew, a pure Hebrew dialect, nearly the same as was spoken in the country of Israel. The population of Carthage was derived from Palestine, and its civilization was Hebraic in origin. Schlaus is certain, after much research, that the language Hannibal spoke and in which he directed his troops was Hebrew. There is evidence that the Carthaginians possessed a high priesthood, and their ceremonies and sacrifices were similar to the rituals found in the book of Leviticus. According to some inscriptions, the Hebrew tribes of Asher and Zebulun were in Carthage from the foundation of the city. At the ruins of Carthage were excavated many inscriptions containing many Hebrew names such as Joab, Joaz, and Joel or Joel. The city of Tunis is said to be neither Arab nor European. Tunis is a Jewish city. Nowhere else does the Jew feel at home as he does in Tunis. Slouch says so beautifully, and indeed, Tunis, The inheritor of Hebrew Carthage is the eternal city of the Jews. For, like the phoenix, the Jews have risen again and again out of the ashes of their destruction. After the sacking of Carthage, the Jews were found again in Carthage under Roman domination. After the Byzantine persecutions, they fled into the desert. And even under the persecution of the Arabs, the Jews somehow managed to survive catastrophe after catastrophe. The Moorish Empire. In less than 100 years, the black Arabs had pushed their way completely across North Africa in the 7th century. At this time, the Arabs were black. They had not mixed much with other people. The Arabs did penetrate into the interior of the Sahara Desert, but only in small numbers, so that the territory remained basically African. Many, Mulay Idris, the descendant of Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, brought northern Morocco under his control late in the 7th century. His son and successor was Idris II, who founded the kingdom of Fez. At this time, the land of Spain, the black Jews, at this time in the land of Spain, the black Jews were persecuted, and many had fled to Morocco for refuge. As a result of this persecution, the Jews of Morocco and the Moors planned to invade Spain with the assistance of Spanish Jews. In the meantime, the plot was uncovered, and the Jews of Spain suffered for their intentions. Early in the 8th century, the Mohammedans from Morocco, united with the black Jews, made what we call an amphibious landing at Gibraltar. This invasion was successful. Nahum Schlaus says that the first one to set foot on the soil of Spain was General Tarif, a Jew of the tribe of Simeon, after whom the island of Tarifa, opposite Tangiers, was named. However, the Rock of Gibraltar, previously known as the Pillars of Hercules, received its new name from the great Moorish conqueror Gebel al-Tariq, which means the mountain of Tariq. Here is a vivid account of the conquering Moors described by a writer who sympathized with Christian Spain. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch, their eyes shone like burning candles, their horses were swift as leopards, and the riders fiercer than a wolf in sheepfold at night. The noble Goths were broken in an hour, quicker than tongue can tell. O luckless Spain! These black Moors ruled over parts of Spain for more than 700 years. During the time, the Moors developed the greatest cultural civilization known anywhere in Europe. The last half of the 11th century, there emerged a powerful dynasty of sultans from Senegal, West Africa, known as the Almoravides. They established their capital at Marrakesh, Morocco, and became masters of a new empire that included Senegal, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and southern Spain. This empire was even larger than Western Europe. At this time, the first general of the Senegalese was Abu Bakr, who was supplanted by a stronger general, Yusuf bin Takfin. Yusuf's first aim was to construct an elegant capital with marvelous houses, a marble-floored palace, and beautiful flower beds. The city he built, Marrakesh or Morocco City, became the name of this country. When Moorish power was declining in Spain, Yusuf crossed the Mediterranean into Spain in order to reinforce Moorish control. He brought 15,000 black troops with him and defeated Alfonso VI with his 70,000 Christians at the Battle of Zalaca. During the wars of the Almoravides, the greatest commander and hero of Spanish literature was slain. His name was Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, better known as El Cid. The Moors were known for more than just conquest. While the remaining part of Europe was in a state of ignorance, the Spanish people took advantage of the knowledge of the Black Moors during the Moorish rule. Many other capitals of Europe were mere hamlets, but Cordova, the capital of Spain, was a booming city. It is said that after dark, one could walk many miles in Cordova and never pass through a street not lighted by public lights. When a person walked out after dark in London, he had to carry a candle or lantern with him to illuminate his path, and had to wear high shoes to walk through the thick mud that often covered the roads. When many Europeans were garbed in skins and coarse garments, the Moors were wearing silks, linens, and cotton cloth. They also washed in 900 bathhouses of Cordova. The palace of the Moorish sultan or caliph was far greater in beauty, comfort, and wealth than any of the castles of the medieval kings. The Moors used extremely high polished marble in their construction. The sides of the walls were patiently carved, and the floors were made with various decorations called mosaics. It is said that the Moors were masters in mosaic work. The Arabs and Moors were known not only for their handicraft, but also for their science. Most of the knowledge of ancient Greece and the Near East was unknown in Europe during the medieval period. The Arabs have come into close relationship with Greek and Persian culture. The Arabs did not destroy this culture. Instead, they brought it to North Africa. There were many famous Moorish and Hebrew scholars in southern Spain. The black Jews, like the Arabs and Moors, made a great contribution not only to Afro-Asian civilization, but also to the European. The Jews in the East knew Greek and Syriac. They helped translate the works of the Greek philosophers into Arabic. In turn, these works were studied by the Arab-speaking Jews of North Africa and Spain and translated into the Hebrew. The black Jews of the Moorish kingdom of Spain translated these works into the Latin language, and from Spain, the sciences of the Greeks and the Afro-Asian people were transmitted to Western Europe. Erudite Moorish men made spectacular contributions to philosophy, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and botany. The Muslim doctors were no sawbones, but masters of their science. They established academics and universities for the rich. Also, there were many free schools. There were excellent libraries. The scholarly Caliph of Cordova in the 10th century sent all over the world for books. The library of this caliph contained over 400,000 volumes. Moorish normal life was based on agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. The Moors brought into Spain rice, cotton, peaches, oranges, and lemons. Silk culture was introduced into Spain by the Moors. The Moors had fine pottery, glazed tiles, silks, velvet, brocades, jewels, and ornamental leather products. Moorish civilization had a gigantic effect on Portugal and Spain. This is the reason that these two countries were the first European powers to emerge after the Dark Ages. In the process of time, the Moors were driven southward. In the 11th century, El Cid conquered the great Moorish city of Valencia. Much later in the 13th century, the King of Castile conquered Seville and Cordova. Afterward, the Moors were pushed into a small region called Granada. Outstanding Black Jews. Some of the outstanding Black Jews of Portugal, Spain, and North Africa were the following: Hadassi ibn Shaprut, who lived between 925 and 975. He began his career as a physician and continued his interest in the medical profession, especially in drugs. Eventually, he became physician to the Caliph. Later, he rendered official advice concerning diplomatic matters. He remained in the center of Hebrew scholars whom he supported. He entertained Moses ben Hanok, a representative of the Babylonian academies, who began the foundation of the Talmudic learning in Spain. Sadia Gaon was born in 892 in the district of Fayoum, Upper Egypt. He was learned in the Bible and the Talmud, in Arabic as in Hebrew literature, in Greek and Arab philosophy. He was one of the first Hebrew grammarians and philosophic commentators of the Bible. Sadia composed special works on many subjects such as philosophy, astronomy, geography, theology, mathematics, music, poetry, chronology, and theology or philology. Isaac of Fez, Morocco, or Alfasi, so named because he came from the city of Fez, lived during the 11th century. Although the first important academy was founded by Moses ben Hanok in Cordova, the real foundation of Spanish Talmudic tradition was laid by Alfasi. The interest of Alfasi was in Talmudic law, especially such as were vital for the Hebrews of the dispersion. Samuel ibn Nagdela lived from 993 to 1056. He started out as a grocer. His acquisition of knowledge in the languages, mathematics, and philosophy was extraordinary. Because Samuel had a beautiful handwriting, he was appointed secretary of the Grand Vizier. In this position, he was able to put to good use his wisdom and knowledge. When the vizier died, Samuel succeeded him as advisor to the Moorish king of Granada. On several occasions, he was appointed as the head of the Moorish armies of Granada. Samuel ibn Nagdela was respected also in Jewish circles. The king of Granada elevated him to the position of Nagid, that is, prince or leader of the Jews. Moses Maimonides was the outstanding black Jew during the Middle Ages. He is known as Rambam, 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 Rabbanu Moshe ben Maimon. Moses was born in Cordova on March 30th, 1135, the eve of Passover. His father, Maimon, was an offspring of a great family of scholars and religious leaders. His family tree has been traced to Rabbi Judah, the prince, the composer of the Mishmah, to the royal house of David. While the Talmud and rabbinics were the chief subjects of the Maimonides, he dedicated time to the sciences that were taught and postulated by the ancient Greeks and medieval Arabs. He received his learning under the Hebrew and Moorish teachers, and before long he was learned in the natural sciences, mathematics, medicine, metaphysics, philosophy, and logic. In the year 1145, when Moses was 10 years of age, Abdullah ibn Tumart, a religious fanatic, founded the dynasty of the Almohades. The Almohades, who proclaimed a religion of absolute monotheism, succeeded after many battles in expelling the Almoravides, black Moors from the highland of Morocco, and established their own rule over the Moorish Empire. The Almohades directed a reign of terror and persecution not only against Judaism and Christianity, but also against sectarianism and Islam. The Almohades displayed their intolerance for other religions. There were prohibitions against the existence of churches and synagogues. Jews and Christians were given the one alternative: Islam or death. Abdul Muhaymin, who succeeded Abdullah ibn Tumart, permitted heretics to depart from his country. The Christian exiles found asylum in northern Spain. It was difficult for the Jews to find a place of security, and many of them died by the sword as martyrs for their religion. Some of the Jews converted to Islam as a disguise and remained loyal to their own faith, practicing Judaism in secret. After about the middle of the 12th century, when Mohammedanes was 13 years of age, the Almohades crossed the Mediterranean into Spain and established their power in Andalusia. In the late spring of that year, the Almohades invaded the city of Cordova and instituted a reign of terror and persecution. The magnificent synagogues were destroyed. The Talmudic schools at Seville and Lucena were closed, and non-believers in Islam, Jews and Christians, were given the alternatives of Islam, expulsion, or death. Because of all this turmoil and social unrest, the family of Moses Mohammedans decided to depart from that inhospitable land and to sail across the Mediterranean to Morocco and northern Africa. They remained in the city of Fez for about 5 years, then traveled to Palestine. Because the environment was not conducive to learning, Moses moved to Egypt. Moses Maimonides continued his studies in medicine. His fame as a physician now spread throughout Egypt and beyond. It is said that Moses was offered a position as a physician to King Richard the Lion-Hearted, leader of the Third Crusade. When Moses was about 50 years of age, he was appointed by Alfadel, the vizier of Egypt, as his own medical advisor, and he was given a place among the royal physicians. Moses was also a great leader and judge of the Egyptian Jewish community. His son followed in his footsteps, religiously and secularly, receiving the leadership of the Jewish communities and as a physician to the Sultan. Other outstanding black Jews of Spain were poets such as Solomon ibn Gabriel, Moses ibn Ezra, and Judah ha-Levi. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal. It was A.D. 1492, January 2nd, when the Moorish stronghold of Granada surrendered to the armies of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. For the first time since the year 711, all of Spain was in Christian hands. The decree to expel the Jews from Spain was signed on March 31st in one of the corridors of the great Alhambra, the palace of the Moorish kings of Granada. The reason given for the expulsion of the Jews was that it was thought they corrupted the Marranos, Jews converted to Christianity, by privately encouraging them in disloyalty to Christianity. The ultimatum given to the Jews expired August 1st, 1492. But the last group of Jews did not leave until August 2nd, 1492. This date is of strange coincidence. That day was the 9th of Ab, the fast day, which is reminiscent of the destruction of the first and second temples. Professor Alan H. Godbey says that the reign of the last Jewish king of Ghana terminated in 1492. In order to satisfy Queen Isabella of Spain, King Manuel of Portugal promulgated a royal decree expelling the Jews and Moors from his country in 1496. The Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal were scattered throughout the Mediterranean coast. It is estimated that over 100,000 Jews departed from Spain and Portugal during the persecutions and the expulsion. Some of these Jews went to Northern Europe, Italy, and Turkey, but most of them went to Muslim countries of Northern and Western Africa. These black Jews would naturally go to African countries most of all because of less persecution, and they could disguise themselves easily among blacks. R.H.M. Aylways gives a graphic description of the Portuguese Jew, Baruch Spinoza. Middle-sized, good features, skin somewhat black, black curly hair, long eyebrows of the same color, so that one might know by his looks that he was a descendant from Portuguese Jews. When the Jews were expelled from Spain, about 100,000 entered Portugal. They were permitted to enter under the condition that they paid the poll tax, with the understanding that they would leave the country within 8 months. Also, at this time, the king obligated himself to take the Jews wherever they desired at the termination of the 8 months. When the time expired, many Jews were stranded because the king did not provide enough ships in time. All the black Jews who were left behind were deprived of their freedom and sold into slavery. During the reign of King Johail II, or John II, 700 black Hebrew children were ruthlessly taken away from their parents in Portugal and transported to the island of San Tome, off the west coast of Africa. This island is located near Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Alan H. Godbey says that the Portuguese founded the island of San Tome in 1471. In the year 1484, King John II of Portugal, who reigned from 1481 to 1495, offered the Jews of his kingdom the choice of baptism or settling at San Tome. Multitudes of Jews were sent to this island during the reign of King John II. These Jews, Judeos, as the Portuguese called them, are serious, reserved, and wealthy, holding most of the trade in their hands. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to establish themselves on the West African coast. They came first as merchants and secondly as conquerors and slaves. Later in this work, the black Jews in the Portuguese possessions in West Africa will be discussed in greater detail. Now, let us return to the Jews of North Africa. With the influx of tens of thousands of black Jews from Spain and Portugal seeking refuge in African ports, Morocco received a great share. But before this date, many Jewish tribes were entrenched in Fez, the Atlas, and the desert. In Morocco, there was a revival of Moorish and Jewish science in all areas. My apologies. The Hebrew Academy in Fez competed with the one in Kairouan, Algeria. There were many debates and lectures between the sages and scholars of these schools. Eldad the Danite, a Hebrew from the Jewish kingdom of Ghana, visited these schools in the 9th century. There was a celebrated Hebrew college at Sisjamasa in the desert of South Fez. The school of Sisjamsa produced many illustrious scholars. There were grammarians, masters of Talmudic law, poets, and philologists. The period of Jewish scholarship came to an end when the fanatical Almohades Unitarians went on the warpath in 1145 and destroyed the city of Sejimahas. This region of terror was carried out against all non-Muslims. Concerning the destruction of Sejimahas, Ibn Ezra writes, I say, let there be mourning for the community of Sijuasa, city of great scholars and sages. She sees her light covered with shadows. The pillars of the Talmuds were shattered. The temple of law was destroyed, and the Mishnan was trodden underfoot. There are many Jewish tribes and settlements throughout Morocco and the Sahara Desert. The Ait Musa, or Beni Musa, sons of Moses, is one of the spectacular Jewish tribes. Leo Africanus, a Moorish converted Jew, states that the Jews of North Africa are of a hybrid quality. They have proselytized and intermarried among the Greeks, Vandals, Romans, Spaniards, and Portuguese. The Jews intermarried among the Greeks when the latter established their colony in Libya called Cyrenaica. Some intermarriages occurred between Jews, Romans, and Vandals when the latter two invaded North Africa, and before the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal, there were some intermarriages. Considering all this intermingling, many Jews of North Africa still retain much of their colored features. According to Maurice Fishberg, who was also quoted by Alan Godbey, he was unable to distinguish a Jew from a Mohammedan while passing along the streets of Algiers, Constantine, a city of northern Africa, and Tunis. It is remarkable that among the non-Jewish natives there are seen many Jews of Negroid type. Fishberg visited Africa during the early part of the 20th century. There are black Jews living in the multitude of oases in the Sahara Desert. Nahum Schlaus, the white Jewish rabbi, visited these Jews of North Africa and the Sahara during the turn of this century. Schlaus obtained his information of these Jews from three sources: one, from the historical records of the Arabs; two, from the oral traditions of the inhabitants of the Sahara; three, from archaeological evidence excavated from the ruins of old Jewish cities in the Sahara and Sudan, which date from the 13th century. About halfway down the eastern border of Algeria, there are large settlements of black Jews at a place called Wargla, says Schlaus. Jews were at Wargla as early as 620 AD, according to Godbey. Again, Godbey says, in the Wargla oasis of Algeria, 350 miles from the Mediterranean, is a colony of Jews as black as Negroes. In the Gaharian section of Libya, not too far from Wargla, there exist the Troglodyte Jews. It is reported that the Jews fled to the strongholds of the Nefosa mountain range because of Roman and Arab persecution. Godbey quotes H.S. Cowper, who says that the Jews of the city of Tripoli asserted that they migrated from Gaharian. These Jews constructed subterranean synagogues and underground houses. Schlaus visited the strongholds of these troglodyte Jews in the early part of this century. The Jews had built compartments of 3 and 4 stories underground, containing a population of 30,000. Godbey says that Hess Warteg visited their cities of Ben Abbas, Jebel Nefusa, Yehud Abbas, Tigrinia, Jebel Ephraim. They had shops, stores, schools, and synagogues all underground. The achievements of these Jews prove what a persecuted society can do under adverse conditions. These Jews had a foundation to build on. Unlike other persecuted people, they had their history, culture, laws, language, and skills. Between Wargla and the Gaharain, there is a Jewish town called Tigrania. Here the Jews have also constructed subterranean compartments. Nahum Schlaus says he was guided to an ancient synagogue which was located underground. At this time, he made an extensive observation of the village, which contained 20 underground courts and its 700 inhabitants. Also, he found there a young man teaching Hebrew. When Schlaus was in this city about 1 hour, The men had just returned from the market. Slouch said they are all of a fine dark type. The rabbi was descended from Jews who had immigrated from Morocco. The rabbi at this time informed Slouch of the fact that there existed in the district many traces of deserted Jewish cities and centenaries now abandoned. The Jews of this country have handed down the oral tradition that in ancient times they constituted the majority of the population, but that epidemics, wars, and frequent conversions of Islam's Islamism have reduced their number. On one occasion, Slouch met a Jewish itinerant merchant of Nefosa who had just arrived from Fezzan. This Jew had traveled all the routes of the Sahara. He assured Slouch that other Jews existed at least in the East Sudan, Chad, Sudan, and Ethiopia. A black-skinned population which some call the Felici and which are generally known among the Tuaregs as the Krit. They observe the Sabbath, and are known to be of Jewish origin. Many of the tribes in the Sahara and in the Sudan are Muslims in religion, but are Hebrew in nationality. Nahum Slouch says numbers of these Islamized Jews may be found everywhere. They are among the nomads of Algeria, the Samul, the Hanasha, the Tras, the Masmata, the Musjarin, the Kabyles, the Kabyles, the Tuat. You will find them among the Urishfana, the Geharani, the Brahmi in Tripoli. You will find them in southern Morocco among the powerful clans of the Dagatuns, who control the routes to the Sudan and southward. They are non-Jewish by religion, but aware of their Hebrew origin. They are friendly to the Jewish merchants. Frequently, the Jew is the only communication between these tribes and the outside world. The Dagaroon Jews are scattered in clans throughout many caravan route oases of the Sahara and the Sudan. Godby says the word Dagatun means traders. They are located near Timbuktu and hundreds of miles northward. They are also found east of Timbuktu and Gao. The two main factors that motivated the black Jews to penetrate into North Africa were commerce and persecution. Also, these two factors impelled them to migrate into Central Africa, which is known as the Sudan. End of part 1.